Good day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Gratiaen PODS, where we engage in conversation with people, eminent people connected to the literary arts. And today in our program, we have Gregory Pardlo, who is currently visiting Sri Lanka as a part of a collaboration between the Gratiaen Trust and the NYU Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Gregory. So Gregory is a US poet who is currently based in Abu Dhabi, whose career includes several publications, including 2 collections of poetry, a memoir, and a work in translation. So the collections Totem, which came out in 2007, and Digest in 2015, I think first set up Gregory as a poet of repute. And to this, he has added the memoir, Air Traffic, a memoir of ambition and manhood in America, which was published in 2018, and the translation, Pencil of Rays and Spiked Maize, a translation of a work by Neil Lingzu in 2004. And Gregory is also the winner of the coveted Pulitzer Prize in 2015, and currently he is working as a professor of literature and creative writing at NYU Abu Dhabi. So let's get down to things, Gregory.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't pick this up. So my last book is Spectral Evidence, and that came out in 2024.
2024.
Yeah, poetry collection.
Spectral Evidence.
Spectral Evidence.
Poetry collection.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Brilliant, right. So I think to start off with, Gregory, because your name is new to Sri Lankan audiences, and probably the work, even where circulation is concerned, maybe it's not very prominently placed in Sri Lankan shops even at the moment.
I wouldn't expect it to be, yeah.
So I think it makes sense to maybe start off with a bit of a self-introduction, how you kind of position yourself, especially for the benefit of an audience that is just getting into your work.
Well, so as you mentioned, my first book, my first poetry collection came out in 2007. I started out as a poet, and my interest sort of evolved from there into the essay, the lyric essay specifically. I'm most interested in the American politics, I think, and particularly from an African American perspective. I think the efforts underway now that we're very familiar with have long existed to silence marginalized voices in general. And so I think a big part of my project is to point to the histories and stories and hypocrisies in the U.S. culture, which is a shortcoming, I find, in the global context, because a lot of people who are potential readers who are not familiar with the U.S. references, the American references, might feel left out. And so I think the evolution of my work is toward a more global awareness. Nonetheless, still interested in, or in fact, all the more interested in the social justice, free speech, equality, these issues.
So we kind of highlighted your trajectory starting in 2007, and then through Digest to the most recent collection, 2024. That's a period of almost 18 years, right? So how do you kind of map that arc? What kind of major changes in the way you present yourself, the stuff you talk about, have you noted?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first book was, I think, the emotional landscape undergirding the first book is my anxieties around becoming a father. A lot of my work, the memoir in particular, has to do with my father, who was a huge figure in my life. My parents are both sort of activists in the late 60s, early 70s. And they raised me with that sort of consciousness. And so I've my mother's an artist, and my father became a union leader. And so my work has long tried to balance the arts and activism and how we think about future generations and what we're contributing to the world. So all of that is a preamble to my anxieties around becoming a father in the first book. And by the time we get to Digest in 2014, I am now anxious about having been a father and watching my children become independent thinking, sentient beings, and what I may or may not contribute to that process. And I think what I'm interested in there is not just, what am I doing in the world as a dad, but what am I use myself as an example, as a sort of source of investigation for commenting on larger social issues. Certainly the stereotypes about African American men are very damaging, and I challenge those, and I question my complicity in them and my resistance to them. Get to, and I think the question implied in your question is, what are you doing over this long period of time with only producing 3 or 4 books? Well, precisely, I'm raising my kids. So by the time we get to 2024, Spectral Evidence, I am thinking about the world that my kids are now entering into as independent young adults.
So partly you see this trajectory, you traced your own origins back to parents with a certain degree of political awareness, political commitment, who were activists, and then you also, with your writing, you question some of the things happening around you. But then in 2015, you get decorated with this super mainstream prize, the Pulitzer. So how do you align these
It's quite
factors?
hypocritical, right? Yeah.
What did it mean to you, especially that moment you occupying in time and space when this prize came your way? And how has it featured in your overall career since then?
Yeah. It's funny, as a young artist, poet, who like to think of myself as an intellectual, literary person. A lot of that identity hinges on an outsider status, right? And so then the Pulitzer Prize, sort of throws open a door and says, okay, now you have the stage that you always wanted. What are you going to do with it? And so I had to literally reinvent myself, reimagine myself, and that was really difficult. Woe is me, but it was a huge challenge. Nobody prepares you for that kind of a change. And so the difference was, I want to say it didn't change my work. Obviously, it had to, but it did change the audience I had in my mind, right? And so I was aware of far more people potentially reading my work. I was aware of my work having far more of a potential. The image of the pebble dropping in the water. Now I have a little, substantial stone that I'm dropping in that pond. And so I'm self-conscious about that. What does it do? I think in the long run, it results in me taking a job in Abu Dhabi, in me thinking about the role or the possibilities of coalition throughout the global majority, right? If the U.S. is, if at the core of my work is creating an ethical relationship with our U.S. history, I'm much less confident that that's going to happen within a U.S. domestic context. right? And the way that my beloved country inveigles itself in people's politics and business around the world, I think the challenges are shared quite broadly. And so my interest then becomes more cosmopolitan interest and results in me sitting across from you very happily.
So those are the ripple effects of the stone dropping in the water, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm going to direct you now to the chopping block.
Sure, okay.
Take you into some aspects of writing. I'm sure some of these prompts I'm going to hold at you, these interest wider audience of writers and readers. So maybe one point I would like to pick your brain with is to do with the voice, especially when we create, when we engage as writers, the voice that churns within us, the voice that militates to come out. How that voice gets balanced out, or how you can balance out that voice with the expectations of the impersonal publication industry. I think in a way it's connected to the mainstreaming you spoke about in the earlier question. Any tips you would like to share, or maybe to start off with whether it has ever affected you as a writer, the balancing of the voice with the demands of the literary discourse around it?
Well, I think as a young writer, I certainly was guilty of looking at major publications and thinking, how do I write in a way that will get my work, land my work on those pages? What are the prevailing aesthetics for each one? And so I kind of profiled these things. I think in the harm, of course, that does is it prevents me from being fully imaginative with my own voice. And so the arc of my development, my maturity as a writer, I think has been in always toward taking greater and greater responsibility for the choices that I make on the page, ownership of the choices that I make on the page. Which is not to say that I'm any less conscious of the reader, but I think my relationship to the reader, I was telling you earlier as we were chatting, that for example, my first book, I was writing for my teachers to impress and please my teachers. And the second book, Digest, I was writing for my students to edify, connect with my students. So that relationship shift, I think, is representative of the shift in my voice as well.
I think a point I want to take you back to is the early phase of your emergence as a creative. Whether there are any writers, any poets in particular, who inspired you or whose work played a defining role of the early Pardlo.
Yeah. So two in particular. So of course there's the work of our education, right? I mean, we raised reading and having certain canons foisted upon us. But the first poets that I experienced outside of a classroom, one was Cornelius Eady. Is this African-American poet who came to Camden, Camden, New Jersey, where I was an undergrad, to give a reading. And here this young black guy comes in, he's wearing, Converse sneakers, high-top sneakers, and doesn't look anything like I would expect at that time a poet to look like. That a poet should look like anything, right, was the problem to begin with. But he was reading poems about his father, about his relationship to legacies of racism, about his relationship to himself and sort of self-actualization. And that was a huge inspiration early on. In fact, I don't know if I've ever told him. Cornelius is a big figure in American poetry. The other figure, again, someone who came to read at my university, was Yusef Kumanyaka. And his work, the lyricism of his work, was that mind-blowing moment. And I think that is so important in any writer's evolution where we say, you can do that? That's possible? And then, I'm off. So I think those two were really important figures.
Drawing closer to home, what about South Asian writing, South Asian / Sri Lankan writing? Whether there are any voices that attracted you, that detained your attention, any writers you took seriously?
When I went to NYU for grad school back in 1999, one of my professors was Aga Shahid Ali. And he was a huge influence on me and just interpersonally. And his work was another one of those, you can do that kind of moments. The lyricism of the ghazal was, I think, still very present in my work, right? The leap in logic, the way the line moves, not in a narrative way, not to tell a story, and not even in a rhetorically, sort of productive way, but the logic of the image was really instructive for me.
So with that, if we again move in the direction of the U.S., because a lot has been happening in the U.S. cultural scene, in the literary scene, a lot of explosions happening between genre, in intra-genre spaces. How would you highlight some of the new directions, the new tendencies, trends that you see in American writing?
Well, one is not so new, but I think really important. And I mentioned Cornelius Seedy. Cornelius Seedy is one of the founders of Cave Canem, and this organization is an organization of African American poets. It's a retreat, so 2 weeks, I believe, over the summer. People who have applied to this program will gather. Toy Derricott is the other co-founder. And I participated in this in the late 90s. It is now hugely influential. You cannot talk about American poetry without talking about Cave Canem. It has influenced similar organizations in different communities throughout the United States. I say that to say that at the core, I think, of American poetry is an interest in the diversity of our voices, which is, of course, diametrically opposed to the interests of the current administration, right? And so there's this interesting kind of tension between a literary community that is interested in ushering in new voices, hearing from diverse voices other than themselves, and I think an increasingly globally oriented American poetry. In tension with, as I say, this more solipsistic kind of governing institutional overview. Okay, so I say that. Another more contemporary, coincidentally, I'm concurrently judging a prize for Vanderbilt University. And I'm reading manuscripts, and one of the things that I noticed and I'm curious about, and I think there is a trend, is a turn toward documentary poetics. And I think poets look to documentary poetics when there are histories that are contested and or under erasure, under threat of erasure. And so using documents in the work is a way of grounding the work in a kind of fact, right? I don't think it's an exaggeration to say we live in a post-truth world, right? And so I think documentary poetics is a way of mitigating the abstraction that poetry tends toward already, and giving it some grounding in the world.
So I think we are in the part of the conversation where we're going to hear you read some of your own work, But before that, so you've been in Sri Lanka for a little under a week. It's a very, very short tour.
Yeah.
So part of the deal was to judge a prize which in abbreviation form corresponds with your initials. Can't be happening too often, that kind of coincidence.
You'd be surprised, actually. Yeah.
So what I would like to ask you is whether there are any highlights you would like to share with the general audience, or any memories that you gathered to take home from this Sri Lankan leg.
Well, I'll tell you, I am not surprisingly really interested in the recent and not so recent history of Sri Lanka. How writers are imagining, like yourself, are imagining nationhood, a national identity that is contested, a national identity that is perhaps bruised, a national identity that is threatened by, as we were talking earlier, brain drain, right? And this kind of diasporic movement. All interests of mine, as you point out, right? And things that are certainly not unique to Sri Lanka. What I do think is unique to Sri Lanka is the way that your writers, and I used this word earlier, I'm not entirely happy with it, but the way that your writers kind of soberly face the reality of tensions of existing and past tensions. I think in my experience, the tendency is to shy away or kind of vaguely and politely allude to, and I read a good number of manuscripts that were very frank. You know, this is the world that we live in. And keep going, right? It wasn't like I'm going to sit here and protest and make a grandstanding statement. No, these are the challenges that we're facing, and the story goes on, right? And so that it has been really inspiring and confronting for me, and you know, and what can I take from that to incorporate into the health of my own writing has been a big question.
All right, Gregory, indulge us. Talk us through what you will share with us. Go ahead.
See.
Yeah.
Yeah, sadly, I have to read off the laptop, which is just, I don't know, I'm a purist. This seems so... Okay, so I'm going to read a poem called Wishing Well from Digest, from the second book, the second poetry collection. Wishing Well. Outside the Met, the Metropolitan Museum, outside the Met, a man walks up, sun tweaking the brim sticker of his baseball cap, and he says, "Pardon me, old school," he says, "you know, is this a wishing well?" I say, "Yeah, son," sideways over my shrug. "Throw your bread on the water." I tighten my chest, wheezy as Rockaway beach sand, with a pull of faux smoke from my e-cig to cozy the truculence I hotbox alone, and I am at the museum because it is not a bar. Because he appears not to have changed them in days, I eye the heel-chewed hems of his pants and think probably he will ask me for 50 cents any minute now. Wait for it. A smoke or something. Central Park displays the frisking transparency of autumn. Tracing paper sky, leaves like eraser crumbs gum the pavement. As if deciphering celestial script, I squint and purse off toward the roofline of the museum aloof as he fists 2 pennies from his pockets, mumbling, and then aloud, "My man," he says, "hey, my man, I'm going to make a wish for you too." I'm laughing now, "So what, you want me to sign a waiver?" He laughs along. "Ain't say all that," he says, "but you do have to hold my hand. And close your eyes." I make a starless night of my face before he asks, "Are you ready?" Yeah, dog, I'm ready. Sure, sure, let's do this. His rough hand in mine inflates like a blood pressure cuff, and I squeeze back as if we are about to step together from the sill of all resentment and timeless toward the dream source of unneeding. The two of us hurtle, sharing the cosmic breast of plenitude. When I hear the coins blink against the surface, and I cough up daylight like I've just been dragged ashore. See now? You'll never walk alone, he jokes, and is about to hand me back to the day he found me in like I was a rubber duck. And he says, you got to let go. But I feel bottomless, and I know he means well, though I don't believe, and I feel myself shaking my head no, when he means let go his hand.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gregory, for that. So I think that brings us to the close of this extremely interesting, engaging conversation we've had.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you for the ideas, Gregory.
Thank you.
So this conversation with Gregory is brought to you courtesy of several people whom we have to highlight in our thanks, especially the NYU Abu Dhabi, who has made this travel, this presence possible, and also the John Keels Foundation, who is the primary partner of the Gratiaen Trust in these activities. So thank you, Gregory. Hopefully we'll meet once again.
I'm sure. I
Yeah.
very much look forward to it.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.